today we had the distinct pleasure of having Jimmy Mellado, President and CEO of Compassion International, join us. And he is someone who's been just an amazing pioneer and visionary in forging ahead on so many levels to really help raise up leaders and to also really think about how to safeguard and steward various lives, including children's lives. Jimmy, welcome to our video cast where we highlight leaders and spotlight them, and to be able to give inspiration to all of us around ways that you're moving forward and pivoting forward with in spite of the pandemic. So welcome, and if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of your background and a little bit of Compassion's background.
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be with you, Karen. Been great to reconnect. We've known each other for many, many years, and so appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys. A quick background on myself. I was born in Latin America and moved to many different countries. Was born in El Salvador. My father was an engineer, and so we lived mostly in the developing world, building roads and dams and irrigation systems and powerhouses. And I was born when he was building a dam and powerhouse in the jungles of El Salvador. Natural birth. I'm actually one generation away from poverty. My mom grew up the daughter of migrant farmers on the Mexico-U.S. border in 1934. And they're 90 years old and 86 years old now, still alive and healthy. But they were real adventurers. I mean, in their 62 years of marriage, they moved 41 times. And so I grew up in 7 different countries, had been to 6 countries before I celebrated my first birthday. So I'm what they consider a third culture kid. And really, so much of that background prepared me for what I'm doing today. I feel like I'm pretty much a global citizen, helping connect the well and the under-resourced world together. And it's a privilege to serve in this ministry that's on the front lines of serving children in poverty. About 2.2 million children that we get to serve through Compassion International. And we do that 100% in partnership with indigenous local churches that live in these impoverished communities. And they serve about 250 children in their community per church. And we have a little over 100,000 workers in those churches that really are serving and meeting the needs of the kids and their families.
That's really great. What a rich background. And yes, I mean, you've been uniquely placed, I would say, uniquely prepared and uniquely placed. Jimmy, tell us with the worldview that you have, given what we're facing today in terms of the pandemic, and we could argue a Black Swan event, how you do see the resource and the under-resourced regions and entities working and functioning?
Well, so far the news cycle has kept us more in the developed world. Haven't heard a lot about what's going on in the developing world. And that makes sense because that's where the virus spread so quickly early on. United States, Europe, China, Asia. And so we're more traveled, more cosmopolitan, and so the virus was able to spread because of that. Well, in the developing world, where a lot of their lives revolve around a 30-mile radius at most, the virus has taken some time to reach those regions, but it's knocking on their door now. And it is reaching these regions. And these are places where the medical infrastructure is compromised, not what they want it to be. The ability to test and to trace and to treat is so compromised compared to the developed world. Here in the United States, we just crossed 100,000 deaths and are on top of it. And the medical community, the government, relief packages, everybody's mobilizing to try to sustain people during this season. Those care systems and support infrastructures simply are not there in the developing world. They're compromised. They don't have the reserves and the wherewithal to take this kind of aggressive action. And so the responses are very aggressive to try to lock things down and have curfews, because they know if it spreads wildly in their settings where things like social distancing are non-starters. Here in the Kibera slums of Nairobi, Kenya, and you got a shack with 6 to 10 people, and right next door another shack with 6 to 10 people, you have community latrines, you have to go out. 70% are day laborers. If they don't work that day, if they don't go out and search for food that day, their family doesn't eat. So these families are really struggling with the real dilemma of going out, possibly contracting the virus, but also being able to provide for their family, or stay locked down, don't leave. You can't provide for your families, and you won't get the virus, but you'll watch your family starve. So take your pick. It's a horrible, horrible situation to be in, and the support systems around them are just not there. And so that's where we live in both of those worlds. We live in the well-resourced world because we connect with people that care, and to help them be a part of the solution to care for those that don't have some of the support infrastructure around them. And that's what we're trying to do at Compassion. We're trying to be that bridge.
Wow, Jimmy, what a dire picture that you painted, and just the choices around sustainability, right, sustenance, and then also kind of the answer of very high and harsh containment is what I'm hearing from what you painted.
Indeed, and I think really food security. I mean, they're very concerned about the virus, but when you get down to a family level, and I was just talking to a pastor that's on the front lines in one of these communities, and he was telling me how they're more concerned about food security. Right now is a planting season, and if they can't go out and plant, and the way they plant is more communal, where multiple families come together and they together plant each other's fields, it's just more efficient for them to do that, but they can't because they're on lockdown. So if you don't plant now, there is no harvest 3 to 4 months from now.
Right,
so not only can they not get food now, they probably won't be able to have food later. So they're super concerned. We're seeing the dynamic of temporary adoptions where families are going to their churches and saying, we can't take care of our kids. We love them, but can you take care of our kids for the next few months during this season? And then obviously we'd like to have them back. We love them. But we're seeing that kind of dynamic. And in the developing world, the concept of sharing and being for each other is, I have found, really, really strong, and even stronger than in some of our well-resourced environments where the sharing isn't quite as prevalent as it is when your life is on the line.
Well, how are you seeing generosity and the trend of generosity right now?
Well, like I mentioned, in the developing world, they're helping each other, caring for each other's kids. They're doing the best that they can, for sure. Because if they don't know if anybody will come to help. So there's a lot of helping of each other in those settings. In the developed world, what we are finding is really all over the map. We've been engaging our supporters with high-touch communication. I've been on the phone, Zoom calls throughout the last few weeks, just a ton of Zoom calls, connecting with people. And we have certain circumstances where some supporters, one example, a supporter was in the fracking business in petroleum. How pounded has that industry been? So they're having to furlough and lay off and make drastic changes, and they're trying to survive. And then on the other end, dealing with folks that whose business they can't keep up with. They're part of providing some support to even the vaccination process for the flu and potentially COVID-19, or other essential businesses, and they're trying to keep up, and their sales are actually up. So, and everything in between. Now, what's been inspiring to me is that those that can give, we have found they are giving. We have a waiver program, that if someone can't afford their sponsorship, their monthly sponsorship for a child, we have a waiver fund, and if they want to stay connected to that child, we say, don't worry about the payments. We'll cover the payments. You just keep caring for your child, write them letters, etc. Pray for them. And when you can afford it again, you give us a call. And the vast majority of them come back within 4 or 5 months.
That's great.
And not only that, we've asked folks that can cover those that can't support their child right now, if they would step in the gap and they are. We're having so many people say, I can stand in the gap for that other sponsor that can't afford it and cover that. We have an initiative right now with a number of professional athletes, Super Bowl MVPs, Super Bowl champion quarterbacks, and others that they asked us, how is the ministry going? And we said, well, we'll survive as a ministry. We have some reserves, so we'll be fine. But this spring, we registered a lot of children in our program, up to 260,000 children. And we were hoping for 70,000 of them to get sponsored in the spring. Well, everything was canceled. So no concerts, conferences, churches weren't meeting. We weren't doing Compassion Sundays. So 70,000 kids didn't get sponsored. They missed the cycle. So these professional athletes have come together to say, let's stand in the gap for them. We're not filling stadiums right now, and 70,000 is the average size of an NFL stadium. Let's fill a stadium of a different kind. And the first NFL player that stood for this was Nate Solder, the offensive tackle of the New York Giants. And he committed and said, I want to cover 2,000 of the 70,000 kids myself. And it's to cover a kid is to care for their needs during this COVID-19 crisis, and not only their needs, but their family needs. Because while we serve 2.2 million children, that represents 9 million people in the households that we're caring for. And so, this athlete stood up and said, we want to cover them. And it takes about $500 to cover for their expenses of one child and their family for 1 year. And so we'll serve them. And and so there's some momentum growing there around athletes stepping up and saying, we can stand in the gap and for these children and their families during this COVID-19 season when they didn't get a sponsor.
Jimmy, I hear a lot of ingenuity and inspiration and the things that you're seeing in both under-resourced and resourced. I hear a lot of extremes, whether companies are, experiencing tremendous demand or no demand, and the same thing in family situations. And what I do love is an underpinning of what you've been talking about, which is relationship. I hear a lot of relationships, whether it's one-to-one, or at a family level and it's personal, or across different organizations. It really just sounds like you're evolving a lot of the relationships you have had and taking it further.
No doubt. Our entire strategy is built on relationship and partnership. Partnership with these indigenous local churches and partnerships with other NGOs to bring their interventions on behalf of these local churches and their communities. So you're absolutely right. This whole thing is built on relationship.
With folks who are entering relationships, I've heard a lot in the marketplace that it's a little bit harder in the virtual world to start establishing trust early and really evolving a relationship. What would you say to that?
Well, like everybody else, we had to pivot. We have about 3,400 staff worldwide that serve these 8,000 churches that have the 100,000 plus workers. So we had to pivot, and we were not meeting, obviously, in groups. We weren't meeting in our offices. And yet our mission still continues. Not only does it continue, the mission is needed even more now, but we can't meet like we usually did. So we're like everyone else. I'm doing, tons of Zoom meetings all day long. I think I'm up to, I've had some days where I've had 11 Zoom meetings, and we've instituted, because I think the challenge for us was, number one, meeting the needs of the kids and the families. Since they can't come to the church, how do we take the program to the families? Because they can't gather 250. That's a non-starter. You're not allowed to gather with groups like that. So how do we flip the program to distribute the resources and the aid to the families? And in Kenya, when they said, we don't want people distributing directly to families because they had some rioting occurring there. So we're able to, because of the system in Kenya, disseminate resources, cash, digitally to the families. They have a system where you can, through cell technology, we can transfer funds. And so we've been able to get cash directly to families there. And it's different in every country because the setting is a little bit different, circumstances a little different, but we are now flipping it so that we can take the food and we can take the medical supplies and we can take the training to the families while our staff are protected with the right kind of personal protective equipment and all of that for sure, and following national guidelines. So that was the number one challenge, is how do we flip the program and take it to them, since they can't come to the church to receive the support. But number two was, how do we keep our staff engaged? How do we care for the kids and their families? But then second, how do we keep our staff engaged in a digital space? So we started a level of frequency of connection and communication with our staff. I started doing a global update every week, a CEO update every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock Central Time or Mountain Time. We do a global update. Everybody around the world tunes in, either in the moment or later on. And we have a time of update, our impact financially, the impact to the kids, the impact to our, the churches. What are our plans? Are we going to have layoffs? Things like that. And just keep everybody up to date. And then, and then also have a time of prayer where we can pray for each other. We can connect and share our needs. We can pray for those who are in desperate need around the world as well, and have some time of deep connection. So that's been great. But we also launched in a Microsoft Teams space, a global community space there. We have weekly HR support around how do you office at home? How do you deal with bandwidth issues or officing issues? Can we go visit the headquarters and take my seat back home, for health reasons, and just try to accommodate all that connection, communication, support, tools to be able to keep the ministry going. And the staff has been real resilient. We've created a CFO team, and they meet daily, a cross-functional team to keep up with the economic impacts, short, medium, long term. We created an incident response team that was fired right up, and it's cross-functional, and they're addressing a lot of the ministry needs and how can we help the program in the field adjust the way they need to adjust. And at the same time, we're also engaging a feedback loop because we know we're not going to get it right. So let's hear from our staff. So every 3 weeks, we're doing a pulse survey on different subject matters to give us instant feedback almost that's regular, that we can then respond to. And then 3 weeks later, find out, hey, did it serve you? Did it help? Did it work? And, one thing we did that probably everybody is experiencing is a different kind of reality when you're doing Zoom all day. The drain is deeper. This takes more energy to do Zoom all day. And the psychologists tell us that some of the reasons why is, you're having to expend more energy to communicate and to connect this way because you're not physically in the same room together. And that takes extra energy to do that. And so you're more depleted at the end. So people were working longer and more intensely. So for the next 3 months, in response to that, we've given our staff an extra half day on their weekend. So the weekend starts Friday at noon. And it was so appreciated to just have, a no-fly zone that Friday afternoon, no meetings, take time off, replenish, recover, deal with the issues in your family. So that kind of response has been very well received. Hear from them and respond. Hear from them and respond again.
So high iteration, a lot of changes, a lot of innovation, a lot of engagement. And what I also hear too is not only strategic changes, but very practical, operational, meet people where they are, types of adjustments so that everyone can work well and work and be their best without losing the mission and being mission focused.
No question. And we have other situations where their work actually has been reduced by 50% or more. And so we're doing a lot of redeploying where it's possible to say, hey, there's an overworked team here. There's an underworked team here. Can we take some of these resources and redeploy them over there? So that's, that's going on as well, because it has been different for different departments.
Well, Jimmy, we've really appreciated our time. We could just probably spend another hour with you to learn more and hear more about the things that you're doing. Just so much application from a leadership standpoint and also just an organizational responsiveness. I think it's tremendous. As we are winding up and finishing out, for those who are listening in and they're just curious about how could I help or be involved with compassion, would you just give our listeners a couple sound bites should they choose to engage with your organization?
Yeah, one of the things that we did to respond was really care for not only our children and families, care for our staff, but also care for our supporters. We
Mm,
have 1,000,005 individuals, families that are supportive of the ministry, either through sponsorship or donations. And I would just say that that these kinds of frontline ministries, not just us, many others, we're needed now more than ever.
mm,
Uh, I understand from uh, United Nations, World Bank, that over the next few years, a lot of the progress that we've made on reducing extreme poverty in the world is going to be reversed.
mm,
That over the next few years, 500,000,000 people are going to be put back into extreme poverty, which is living on less than $1.90 a day. In 1990, it was 1.9 billion. Pre-COVID, it was 385 million. That's how much progress was made since 1990, and that's to be celebrated for sure. But
mm.
because of the effects and the secondary and tertiary effects of COVID-19 on fragile economies, 500,000,000 or 500 million people are going to be pushed back into extreme poverty. So now's the time, if you can be generous, be generous. And I
Mm,
would ask, whether it's compassion or someone else, one of the most important things that psychologists tell us you can do when there's a crisis that comes to you that's unwanted and uninvited is, in fact, to serve others. That's one of the healthiest things you can do emotionally and psychologically is, in fact, when you're under pressure, in fact, to serve others as well. So I would just encourage you. You can go to compassion.com. You can either give to our disaster relief fund, which is providing the immediate care for families right now, or you can sign up and care for. Join these professional athletes and support a child and their family. $500 for this next year, and let's get to cover those 70,000 kids that didn't get sponsored and join these professional athletes that are kind of leading the way. And so, yeah, I just encourage you, whether it's compassion or someone else that you trust, give of yourself because the need is greater than ever before.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for your leadership and for your heart. Really, really appreciate your heart and all you're doing to impact lives.
Well, Karen, thanks so much again, and for letting me really be a voice to the voiceless. I'm here really only for that reason, is to be a voice for those that don't have a voice to raise their hand and say we need help. So thank you for the platform and for your investment in helping leaders become better leaders, leading better organizations. So blessings on you for that.
Thank you.